The sharp click of the door behind her echoed through the empty house as Samantha stood frozen in the hallway. Her pulse raced, the weight of the $20,000 inheritance from her late uncle pressing down on her chest like a 1,000-pound stone. The money should have been a blessing, a way out, but now it felt like a trap. She had thought her life was hard before, working long shifts as a nurse, trying to make ends meet. But nothing had prepared her for the betrayal she had just overheard. The words of her husband, David, and his sister Clara had hit her like a slap in the face. "It's not just hers, David. It's ours," Clara had said, her voice full of entitlement. "She's got money now. We can start the business we've always dreamed of." Samantha's blood ran cold as the truth sank in. They didn't see her as a partner. They saw her as a tool. Her heart pounded as she stood there, caught in a whirlwind of disbelief and anger. How could they? How could David, the man she had trusted, the one she had shared everything with, be part of this scheme? Samantha had always been the responsible one, the one who sacrificed so much for her family, and now this was the thanks she got? The realization that her own blood would betray her for money felt like a knife twisting in her gut. In that moment, something inside her snapped. She wasn't going to let them take what was rightfully hers, her chance for a better life. She had spent years in their shadow, always putting others first, always carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. But no more. She had worked hard for this, and now it was time to take control. But as she stood there, a question lingered in her mind, one she couldn't shake. Was she strong enough to fight back? Or would this be the moment she lost everything? Samantha's hands shook as she stood in the empty apartment, staring out the window at the city lights flickering below. The familiar hum of the world outside felt so distant, as if everything she had known had been swept away in an instant. The $20,000 inheritance from her late uncle had once felt like a dream, a golden ticket to a life she'd only dared to imagine. But now, it had become a symbol of betrayal, a heavy reminder of the people who had used her for so long. She had heard David's words echo in her mind over and over. "It's ours too, Sam. You know that, right?" The words weren't just about money. They were about control, about stripping her of the one thing she had left, her own independence. She had spent years in their shadow, always the one to give, to sacrifice. And now, when the one thing she had worked for was finally within her grasp, they wanted to take it from her. David, her husband, the man she had trusted with her heart, had joined forces with his sister, Clara, in a plot to manipulate her into giving up the inheritance for their own gain. It was almost too painful to believe. How could they? How could David, the man she had spent her life with, turn on her so easily? How could Clara, the woman who had always pretended to be a friend, betray her so openly? The thought twisted inside her, like a knife that wouldn't stop turning. Yet, even as the anger and hurt flooded her chest, another feeling began to rise within her, a feeling she hadn't known she still had: strength. This wasn't just about money. This was about her life, her future. For years, she had put everyone else's needs before her own, believing that love and loyalty were enough. But now she understood. Love wasn't enough when it meant giving up who you were. Samantha took a deep breath, the weight of the decision settling heavily on her shoulders. She couldn't go back. She couldn't pretend anymore. As she looked around the empty apartment, she knew one thing for certain. This was her moment. This inheritance wasn't just money. It was her chance to finally live for herself. She wasn't going to let them steal that from her. She wasn't going to let anyone make her feel small again. But the question lingered, hanging in the air like a storm. Could she truly walk away from everything she had known and step into the unknown? The answer wasn't clear, but for the first time in a long time, Samantha was ready to find out. Samantha's breath caught in her throat as she closed the door behind her, the heavy weight of her decision pressing down on her chest. The apartment felt foreign, empty, like a space she had just moved into, even though it was supposed to be her sanctuary. The $20,000 inheritance from her late uncle should have been a blessing, a way out, but instead, It felt like a cruel joke. She had been a nurse for years, scraping by, always putting others' needs ahead of her own, and now, when the opportunity to finally live for herself was in her grasp, it had been twisted into something dark and dangerous. David, her husband, had betrayed her in a way she hadn't expected. He, along with Clara, his sister, had plotted to take the inheritance, claiming it was family money, as if it were their right. "It's not just yours, Sam, it's ours," he had said, the words dripping with entitlement. Her hands trembled as she tried to steady herself. How could they think she would just hand over what was hers? How could they have used her so ruthlessly, made her believe they cared about her, when all they saw was an opportunity to exploit? The betrayal cut deeper than she cared to admit. She had spent years loving David, supporting him, sacrificing for their life together, and this was how he repaid her, by plotting with Clara behind her back. It felt like every ounce of trust she had placed in him had been ripped away in a moment. Yet, as the hurt and anger washed over her, something else stirred within her, a spark she hadn't realized was there. She wasn't just going to lie down and let them take this from her. No, this was more than money. It was a symbol of her independence, of everything she had given up for others. She had always been the responsible one, the one to give and give, never asking for anything in return. But now, Samantha realized she had been giving away pieces of herself for far too long. It was time to take it all back. But the question burned in her mind. Could she truly walk away from David, from everything she had known? Could she find the strength to start over, even if it meant facing the unknown? Her heart pounded in her chest as she thought of the life she had worked so hard to build, only to have it crumble in a matter of moments. But as she stood in the silence of the apartment, looking out at the world beyond, Samantha knew she had a choice. And for the first time in a long time, she was ready to make it. Samantha's hands clenched into fists as she stared out of the apartment window, the city lights twinkling below like distant stars that seemed to mock her every move. The weight of her decision was suffocating. She had spent the last few days in a fog, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The betrayal, the manipulation, the cruel realization that the people she loved most saw her as nothing more than a tool. But now, as she stood there in the quiet of the apartment she had worked so hard to make hers, she could feel the anger boiling inside her. She had been taken for granted, used by David and Clara, all because of that $20,000 inheritance. Money that she had been given in the hope of a better future, but instead had become the battleground for the selfishness of those closest to her. David's words echoed in her mind, each one sharper than the last. "It's ours too, Sam.
You know that, right?"
The audacity, the entitlement in his voice, made her stomach churn.
How could he?
How could he look her in the eye, after everything they had shared, and act like that money wasn't hers to decide? It wasn't just about the inheritance anymore, it was about everything she had endured, all the years she had spent compromising, giving up pieces of herself, always thinking that love and loyalty would be enough.
But now she understood.
Love wasn't enough when it was used as leverage, when it was twisted to serve someone else's agenda. Samantha swallowed hard, fighting the tears that threatened to spill over. This wasn't just about walking away from a marriage or a family, it was about reclaiming her life. She had spent too long putting everyone else's needs above her own, living in the shadow of others' expectations, and now it was her turn to stand in the light. The thought of leaving David, leaving everything behind, made her heart ache. She had never imagined she would come to this point. But in that moment, standing alone in the apartment, she realized that staying would mean losing herself. And she was done with that. But even as she made her resolve, the question lingered in her mind. Was she really ready to walk away from everything? The fear of the unknown gnawed at her. What would life be like without the security of her marriage, without the comfort of the life she had built? But as the silence of the apartment wrapped around her, she knew the answer. The hardest part wasn't walking away, it was knowing she had the strength to start over. And for the first time in years, Samantha was ready to do just that. Samantha paced back and forth in her small, dimly lit apartment, the weight of the last few days pressing heavily on her chest. She had left everything behind: her home, her marriage, the life she had known for over 2 decades, and now, standing here, she felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. The inheritance had been the catalyst, the spark that ignited the fire of betrayal she'd never seen coming. She had thought her marriage was built on trust, on love, but David and Clara had proven otherwise. Their greed had shattered everything, making her question the very foundation of her life. The $20,000 wasn't just money. It was a mirror reflecting all the years she had spent sacrificing herself for others, thinking that somehow love and loyalty would always be enough. But now she knew better. They hadn't cared about her at all. They had only cared about what they could take. She closed her eyes, trying to breathe through the wave of emotions crashing over her. Anger, disbelief, sadness. All of it swirled inside her like a storm. David's voice still haunted her. "It's ours too, Sam. You know that, right?" Those words had cut deeper than anything he'd ever said before. She had trusted him, loved him, and this was how he repaid her. By conspiring with Clara, planning to take what was rightfully hers. She had always been the one to give, to put others first, to make sure everyone else was okay. But when it was her turn to ask for a little peace, a little freedom, they took it all away. Yet, in the midst of the anger, something else began to emerge, something stronger. Samantha felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not hope for reconciliation. Not hope for things to go back to the way they were, but hope for something entirely different. She had always been the caretaker, the one who sacrificed, but now it was her turn to take control. To take back what had always been hers, her life, her choices, her future. The fear was still there, lingering in the back of her mind. What if she failed? What if she was making a mistake? But the fear didn't hold the same power it once had. She had spent so many years hiding behind the facade of family, duty, and responsibility.
Now,
she realized that she was the only one who could make this change. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to happen overnight. But Samantha was done waiting. She wasn't going to sit back and let others decide her fate any longer. As she stood in the quiet of her apartment, the weight of the decision settled into her bones. She wasn't just walking away from David and Clara. She was walking towards something new, something she had never allowed herself to believe was possible. A life where she was in control. And for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face whatever came next. Samantha sat at the small kitchen table, the dim light from the overhead lamp casting shadows across the room. The silence was deafening. For the first time in years, she was alone, not just physically but emotionally and mentally as well. The decision had been made. She had left everything behind, the marriage, the life she had known. And now, the only thing she had left was herself. Her thoughts swirled, a chaotic mix of emotions. The betrayal still stung, sharp and raw, but something else had started to take root inside her. A quiet strength that had always been there, buried beneath the weight of years spent living for everyone else, was slowly rising to the surface. The $20,000 inheritance had been the breaking point, the catalyst that had forced her to confront the truth. She had been living in the shadow of others for too long, and it was time to step into her own light. David's voice echoed in her head, his words still lingering with that chilling sense of entitlement. "It's ours too, Sam. You know that, right?" He had said it so casually, as if he were entitled to it, as if the years they had spent together had given him ownership over her decisions, her choices. But that was the lie she had been living. She had allowed him to take from her for so long, to dictate her life, because she had believed it was what a marriage was supposed to be. But in the end, she wasn't just his partner. She was a pawn in a game she hadn't known she was playing. And Clara, his sister, had been just as bad, her false smile hiding her greed, her need to control and manipulate. The betrayal cut deeper than Samantha cared to admit, but the real pain came from the realization that she had let it happen. She had let them. She had given them so much of herself, and in return, they had plotted against her. But now, As she sat in the quiet of her new life, she realized that the pain was also the key to her freedom. It was the fire that would burn away the remnants of that old life, the life she had outgrown. But even as she embraced her newfound strength, a flicker of doubt crept in. Was she really ready for this? Ready to stand on her own, to make decisions without anyone else's influence? The thought of facing the world alone terrified her, but it also exhilarated her. She wasn't just walking away from David and Clara. She was walking toward a future where she controlled her own destiny. And that future was waiting for her, just beyond the horizon. Samantha stood by the window, staring out at the bustling street below, her mind swirling with the weight of everything she had just lost and everything she was about to gain. The city lights flickered like distant stars, but they didn't offer the comfort they once had. No, now they felt like a reminder of the isolation that was slowly settling over her. She had walked away from everything: her marriage, her family, the life she thought she knew. It hadn't been an easy decision, and even now, standing in the quiet of her new apartment, Samantha wasn't sure if it had been the right one. David's voice still rang in her ears, his words like a haunting refrain. "It's ours too, Sam. You know that, right?" It was as if the years they had spent together, the life they had built, meant nothing compared to his desire to control everything, including her inheritance. And Clara, her scheming sister-in-law, had been right there with him, pulling the strings, acting as though Samantha owed them her future. The audacity, the arrogance of it all, made her blood boil. But even in the anger, something inside her had shifted. She wasn't going to let them take what was hers. Her hands trembled slightly as she wiped away a tear, one she hadn't expected to fall. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt, it was the realization of how far she had fallen from the woman she once was. She had spent years sacrificing herself for the sake of others, believing that love and loyalty were enough. But in the end, they weren't. They hadn't been enough for David and Clara to show even an ounce of respect for her. Now, for the first time in years, Samantha felt something stirring deep inside her, something stronger than any fear or doubt she had ever known. A quiet, steady voice telling her that she had been worth more than this, that she deserved more than this, and that was why she had walked away. But as she sat down, her head in her hands, the fear crept in again. Was she truly ready for this? Ready to face the unknown? To start over in a world where she had no safety net? She had been with David for so long, and the idea of truly being alone, without anyone to rely on, felt almost unbearable. Yet, in the silence of her new apartment, Samantha realized something incredible. She wasn't alone. Not really. For the first time in years, she was reclaiming herself. She wasn't just walking away from David and Clara. She was walking toward something better, something that had always been hers, but she had never been brave enough to grasp. The road ahead was uncertain, yes, but as the last of her tears fell and the weight of the decision lifted, Samantha knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to let fear dictate her future any longer. It was her turn to live for herself, and this time, nothing would stop her. Samantha sat on the edge of the bed, her hands shaking as she stared at the half-empty suitcase on the floor. The room felt colder now, the silence louder. She had spent the last few days trying to sort through the emotions that swirled in her chest: anger, hurt, confusion. And now, as she packed the last of her things, she felt a deep sense of loss. But it wasn't just the life she had shared with David for over 2 decades that she was leaving behind. It was everything she had allowed herself to become. The woman who had silently sacrificed her own happiness for the sake of others. The woman who had let her dreams and desires slip away, thinking that being selfless would somehow bring her peace. But peace had never come, and now, she knew it never would if she stayed. Her hands stilled as her thoughts wandered back to the conversation she had overheard, the words that had shattered everything she thought she knew about love and loyalty. "It's ours too, Sam. You know that, right?" David's voice had been so calm, so certain. And Clara, always the quiet one, had echoed his sentiment. reinforcing the idea that Samantha's inheritance wasn't really hers at all. She wasn't just the recipient of money. She was supposed to be a pawn in their game, an unwilling contributor to their ambitions. The betrayal hit like a fist to the gut. For the first time, Samantha realized that the man she had married wasn't the person she thought he was. He wasn't the loving partner, the man who had promised to stand by her. No, he was someone who saw her as a tool, someone who thought he was entitled to everything she had worked for. The tears came then, unbidden, falling freely as the truth crashed down on her. She had been a fool to believe that love could overcome this kind of manipulation. But as the tears flowed, something else rose inside her, a fierce determination. She had spent years living for others, putting their needs before hers, but no more. This was her life, her decision. And for the first time in ages, she wasn't afraid to fight for it. Samantha wiped her eyes, her breath steadying as the clarity set in. She wasn't just walking away from David, from Clara, from a marriage she thought she could trust. She was walking toward herself, toward the woman she had buried under years of self-doubt and compromise. It wasn't going to be easy. Nothing worth having ever was. But the thought of living her life for herself, of no longer being tethered to their lies, filled her with a sense of hope she hadn't felt in years. She was taking control. She was leaving behind the shadows of betrayal and stepping into a future where she could finally be free. As she zipped the suitcase shut, a new sense of purpose washed over her. She wasn't just leaving, she was moving forward. And she would not let anything, especially fear, stop her now. Samantha stood at the edge of the small balcony, the cool breeze brushing against her face as she stared out at the sprawling city below. It had been days since she walked away from David, from everything she had known, and still, the weight of it pressed down on her. Her heart ached in ways she hadn't expected, torn between the relief of finally breaking free and the nagging sense of loss that clung to her like a second skin. She thought about the life she had built, the years spent compromising, putting up with betrayal, and believing that somehow love would always be enough to fix the cracks. But now, standing here, it was clear that love wasn't enough when it was used to manipulate and control. It wasn't enough when the person you trusted most saw you as nothing more than a means to an end. David's face still haunted her, his angry words, his hurtful accusations. "You don't get it, Sam. I helped you when no one else did." She could still hear his voice, sharp with frustration, full of entitlement. He had always been the one to convince her to stay, to believe that their relationship was worth saving. But in the end, she realized it wasn't just the money he wanted. It was her life, her choices. He had taken so much from her over the years, from her dreams to her sense of self. And now, as she stood alone in her new apartment, it wasn't just the marriage she had left behind. It was the woman she had been, the woman she had lost along the way. Yet, as the city lights flickered below, something within her began to shift. A quiet strength started to rise, an ember that had been smoldering for far too long. She had spent years allowing others to decide her worth, always bending to their will. But now, for the first time, she was making her own choices. And for the first time in years, the thought didn't scare her, it empowered her. But even as the weight of that empowerment settled over her, a flicker of doubt crept in. Was she truly ready for this? Was she ready to face the unknown alone? Could she move forward without the comfort of the life she had known, without the security of a partnership she had invested everything in? As the wind whispered through the air, Samantha knew the answer. She wasn't just running away from David. She was running towards something better, something that had always been hers, but had been buried beneath years of compromise. She wasn't afraid of what lay ahead. She was ready to face it, to rebuild from the ground up, and to prove to herself that she was more than enough, that she had always been enough. As the night deepened around her, Samantha took a deep breath, letting the air fill her lungs. She was no longer a victim of her past. She was ready to create a future on her own terms. Samantha stared at the phone in her hand, her fingers trembling as she read the message from David. "I know things have been hard, but I miss you. Let's talk." I'm sorry for everything. The words blurred as a wave of emotion swept over her, leaving her breathless. She had spent so many sleepless nights since leaving, her mind racing with doubts, with questions that had no easy answers. Did she really make the right choice? Was it possible that David, the man who had betrayed her so deeply, could truly change? Or was this just another attempt to manipulate her, to pull her back into the life she had fought so hard to escape? The silence in her apartment felt louder now, more oppressive. She had been alone for so long, living in the chaos of her own thoughts, that the idea of reconciliation, of reopening that chapter, felt both inviting and terrifying. Her heart ached as she thought of the good times, the years they had spent together. But then her mind would circle back to the betrayal. It's ours too, Sam. Clara's voice echoed in her memory. That sense of entitlement, that greed, as if the inheritance was never hers to decide. Samantha had trusted them, given them everything she had, and in return, they had plotted behind her back, disregarding her autonomy, her future. How could she ever trust them again? Yet, despite everything, she couldn't ignore the familiar ache in her chest, the longing for something she thought was lost forever. Was it possible to forgive? Could she let go of the anger, the resentment, and rebuild the life they had once shared? The thought of it was almost too much to bear. But there was a deeper part of her that knew forgiveness wasn't about them, it was about her. About letting go of the past so that she could move forward, free from the chains of their manipulation. She took a deep breath, the weight of the decision settling over her like a heavy blanket. The truth was, she didn't know if she was ready to forgive them. But what she did know, without a doubt, was that she was no longer willing to let anyone control her life. Not David, not Clara, no one. This was her story now, and she was going to write it on her own terms. With a final, resolute breath, Samantha put the phone down. She didn't need to make any decisions today. She didn't need to answer. She had already made the most important choice of all, to take back control of her life. And that, she realized, was the greatest act of courage she could offer herself.